So we will be starting or continuing in First Chronicles. We are in chapter 21, and we will be starting with verse 6. Excuse me. We're in chapter 22, and we'll be starting in verse 6. So just a recap of last week. The angel of the Lord spoke to David regarding the altar that he would build, and he told him where to go and who to contact. And so the name of the individual his name was Ornan, and him and his sons saw the angel of the Lord who was ready to strike at God's command because they were in the midst of the punishment for David's actions of taking the census. And so we see that he told David to buy his threshing floor and to build an altar there. And so David goes to Ornan and asks for it. And because Ornan had saw the angels, he was willing to give it to David at no cost. But David told him that he would pay for it full price because he wouldn't take anything, he wouldn't dedicate anything to the Lord that didn't cost him something. So he purchases the threshing floor and he builds an altar and he sacrifices there. And so God is pleased with his actions, and he pulls back the angel for further destruction of the people. And then chapter 22 begins with David's preparation of the temple that he wants to build for God. And if we recall, when David had first mentioned this, Nathan the prophet had told him that God had related to him that David would not be the one to build the temple because he was a man of war, and because of the bloodshed that at David's hand, that he would not be the one. But the prophecy came that he would have a son, and his son's name would be Solomon, and he would be the one to build the house for the Lord. And so now David is getting prepared. He's getting the materials, the iron, the nails, the wood, everything that is needed, the bronze that's going to be used to build this house. And now at this point, he is conversing with his son Solomon to let him know what his vision is. And as we look at this is succession planning at its best. When you have a leader who has a desire to do for the Lord, but maybe due to age or to illness or some other limitation, or maybe God spoke to them and said, no, you aren't the one, that this would be something for the next generation. So instead of just saying okay and walking away, David talks to his son and tells him what his plans are and what his desires are, and saying that this responsibility is going to fall on you. And so instead of just leaving him sort of to his own devices, he is putting things in place. So when it's Solomon's time to reign, he can just step in to that position and then move forward to what his father had wanted.
I think you're bringing up a good point about the succession planning. And I think throughout scripture, you see it with Moses and Joshua, Elijah and Elisha, of course, here with David and Solomon, Christ and the disciples. I guess the question I am asking, when you kind of fast forwarded to modern day, when there seems to be no succession plan in place and dysfunction arises, that lends itself to maybe family businesses crumbling or churches crumbling. Uh, would you say that maybe God was not involved in that process, maybe from conception to where it's at? I guess I just find it hard to believe that God would be anywhere around dysfunction and chaos that lends itself to uh, complete operations just withering away.
Yeah, for sure. God is not in turmoil, right? And so if there's any type of, like you say, chaos or disagreement or discord, that those are traits of the enemy. And so the enemy gets in and gets into people and kind of creates that madness. And so we know if that is going on, then God is not in it. Now, to say that he was not in the program or the church or the business, we don't know. And it would just really be our opinion. But as you stated, the Bible clearly shows that when there's a leader, he trains, mentors, teaches the people who are coming up behind him. So the vision will continue, can carry on. Now, there are times when, due to unforeseen circumstances or death, people do put their wishes and plans in writing, but the people who are coming behind them, may it be due to pride or whatever, they don't follow those instructions. And that can cause problems too, especially in a business or, on your jobs. And we have talked about this before, when you have people who are moving on or retiring and you bring it to, someone else, they may have their own vision or they see things differently than what the current practice is. And sometimes those changes can be better. Sometimes it takes fresh eyes to look at a situation and be able to say, okay, we can do this process better, or, this isn't good. But then sometimes people just come in and no matter what the process is, they just want to shake things up, and that can cause issues. Because one of the things, that I have learned, that when you make changes, especially drastic changes, people have to have buy-in. You can't just come in and just turn everything upside down, topsy-turvy, and expect the people who have been currently there doing the work to just fall in line. A lot of times that doesn't happen. And that in itself creates chaos because, you have individuals to say, okay, we've always done things this way, and now you're asking us to do it this way. So in order to make, broad changes or sweeping changes, or sometimes even small changes, you have to know your culture and your climate and the people who are working with you, and, bring in their ideas, their thoughts, and then, come to some sort of agreement or consensus, because sometimes you can make overhaul changes and sometimes you might have to implement things slowly, to see progression.
And I think to that point, I think the best leaders that come in, maybe if you're implementing change, is you come in and you get to know people and you ask questions. I think it's problematic for someone just to abruptly end a process without understanding the history or how it came. I think it's better, you can refine things if you kind of understand, okay, why is it being done this way? Or if something is particularly possible. And that comes with sitting down, asking people, how can I make your job easier? As opposed to just, oh, we're just going to do away with this. And then you're wondering why things are slower. Well, you didn't take the time to ask people questions.
Right. And sometimes you have to do things, especially if you're working for, governmental agencies, sometimes there's laws or regulations in place that require you to do things a certain way. So you just can't stop it. But we see here, David, he understands that. In chapter 22, verse 5, it says,
It's so funny because you said something and I laugh because, well, working in higher ed, people complained that enrollment at colleges tanked or suffered as a result of the COVID pandemic. But I think part of it that people did not quite realize is when they mandated the vaccinations, there were people, because of their own private beliefs, that elected not to get vaccinated, which prevented them from enrolling. And now people are celebrating enrollments increasing, but they got rid of the mandate, which is it's like that connection or that correlation or that link. People seem not to see that, well, maybe some of the things we brought into contributed to our enrollment declines and now our uptick. But it's interesting that those conversations seem not to be taking place. But to me, it appears very obvious.
Yeah. And sometimes we create our own disasters, right? I mean, just by putting mandates or, new requirements, it's can be detrimental to whatever your business is. And it's not just with higher education. You see that in other agencies too, where, people have lost their jobs. And so now, because you see shortages in these areas, they're offering to bring these individuals back. Well, if it wasn't safe then why is it safe now? So, I mean, things change, thoughts and ideas change with the wind. When the wind's blowing east, we go that way. When it's going west, we do an about face. So, we as believers, we need to always consult God about our moves.
And I think to that point, and I know we'll get to scripture, but I think this is just so fascinating, is the number of businesses that through the pandemic were allowing people to work from home. The people got the work done, and now they want to bring them all back to the office as though they cannot do the job they were just doing for 18, maybe 36 months at home. Now you want them back in person. It just seems very interesting.
Yeah, see, it changes the direction of the wind. So, But verse 5 in chapter 22 says, My son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house that is to be built for the Lord shall be exceedingly magnificent, famous and glorious throughout all the lands. Therefore now I will make preparations for it. So David made ample preparations before his death. So David acknowledges that his son is young. Now we don't know how young, and he says he's inexperienced. And so instead of, again, just kind of throwing him to the fire, he's doing as much as he can while he's alive, so that his son, when he does step in, will make his job easier. And this is good for current leaders, as far as mentoring future leaders. You can see potential in someone, but without actually doing a job or maybe going to school or getting that education, a lot of things are learned and experience gained by doing. But when you have someone who's kind of pulling you along and teaching you and showing you the way, when it's your time to step in that road, you can step in with confidence, knowing that you have gained, the skills and knowledge to be able to do the job. And so David is making sure that Solomon will be prepared when his time comes.
And I think when you look at that, the qualifier where it says ample, so that is more than enough, that's plentiful, that's abundant. He was setting Solomon up to be successful. And I think, we talk about children who many times, some for lack of, what is the word I'm looking for? Maybe loving parents. Some parents set their children up for failure where they go and ruin their credit because they're getting water bills or things in their children's name. that they don't set them up for success. And we see here David as a parent made sure that it was more than enough for Solomon to be successful. He knew he was young, he knew he was inexperienced, but he made sure he had what he was going to need to be successful. And I think if we're looking as parents, that should be our desire, is to provide our children a start where they will have the resources to be successful. What they make of themselves after, we lay that foundation is up to them. But here, David was making sure Solomon did not start at a handicap.
Right, amen. And, like you said, that's what we need to do for our own children. This is really a good example because, in this time, day and age, we see, little kids will have the best of everything, wearing the name brand shoes and the name brand clothing, and they can, have the latest technology and all of this. But when it really comes down to it, a lot of people don't even have basic common sense. So you can provide things for your children, but they need more than just things. They need to, know how to be critical thinkers, to think for themselves and not just follow, what the current tide is. And, that's what makes you successful, to be able to stand independently, on your own and make decisions. So it's not all about, just having the things. You need to know how to manage things.
That gets into that saying, you can give someone a fish or you can teach them to fish. So many parents are giving their children the resources, but not giving them the know-how as to how to get those resources.
Right. Amen. So chapter 22, verse 6. Says, then he called for his son Solomon, and this is David, and charged him to build a house for the Lord God of Israel. So he's called Solomon to him, and he's giving him the job of building the house. And David said to Solomon, my son, I had intended to build a house to the name of the Lord my God. But the word of the Lord came to me, saying, you have shed much blood and have waged great wars. You shall not build a house to my name, because you have shed so much blood on the earth before me. So God was always with David, and in his battles, he was always victorious when he sought God. And so God is really not a God of war. He's a God of peace, of love, and compassion. But there have been times, especially when the people went into the land that was promised to them, God did tell them, to wipe out certain people groups. And that was to, so they would not be influenced by what was going on around them, as far as them worshiping idols and taking on their practices. So God did tell them to do that. But David did much more than that, sort of went beyond just, fighting for God in the people of Israel. So, and because of that, God couldn't sanction him, building that house. And he even told him previously that he doesn't need four walls. God is everywhere. So, and what they were building, the temple of the Lord, was to house the Ark of the Covenant. But even in that, God was not confined to that, right? He was everywhere. So he gave David, the resources to build his own castle or mansion or whatever. But that wasn't something that he asked for. But even with that, he would allow it to be done, but it just couldn't, be at David's hands.
It's interesting as we're reading this. and I would be interested to hear from the rest of the class, because we have here David, the father, going to his son, essentially telling his son, I intended to do this, but I'm unable to carry this on. Can you essentially grab the baton and take on this legacy and do, what I intended to do? Can you complete this work? I said that I'm curious to hear from the rest of the class, because one of the things that I find interesting today, there are a lot of fathers who may have went in various vocations. Maybe they were a pharmacist, maybe they were a lawyer, a realtor, whatever it may be. And I think there are a lot of fathers that desire for their sons to carry on that tradition. But I have seen a lot of sons veer away from the profession that their father may have engaged in. And it will be interesting to hear how that conversation goes, which I think is a lot different than this conversation David and Solomon was having.
Well, we have 3 young men here. So how did that go with you? Or, I don't know what your, obviously your relationship with your father, or your parents, but growing up, did your parents kind of try to steer you in a certain direction? Did you go in that direction, or did you? I see some head shaking. So tell us about it.
So for me, my family has like always been kind of like, oh, you got to get the most stable job and then work 9 to 5, and then when you're like 60, you can die. Like, okay, it's like that's like their mentality. And so when I was like telling them like, I want to like do music as a career, how do you do that? I know that's just what I want to do, and it's like I'm still figuring it out, but it's just like, each year it seems more and more like there's like a clear path. Before it was like a meadow. I'm like, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm just going that way. And now it's like I find a path, and then that path leads to other paths, and then eventually I find a road. And now it's just like, so like to them before they thought like I'm just gonna be like some like guy in the bedroom all day playing guitar. And it's like now it's just like, oh, okay, he's going to college and doing like, this is actually a career, what? Or like you can actually make like a job from it. And so that kind of surprised them, because the main thing they wanted me to they wanted me to do something like being an accountant or something, because that's what they try to steer my brother towards, especially my mom. That's her. She's just like, Devin, when you gonna be an accountant and work at Target all day? I'm like, no thanks, I'm good. I like where I'm going. So it's like I feel like it's good to have like a direction, like the parents, like, but like, because they obviously don't want you to just stay home all day, play video games or something. And so it's like it was good of them to like try and steer me towards like a direction, but then it's also like, it's good that they ask questions like, how are you going to support yourself and stuff like that. And so I don't know, I kind of just went out there, but yeah, it's kind of my thoughts.
Like I come from a family where education has always been pushed, and I've always went to school because my family always told me, yeah, you gotta go to school because that's how you get a good career and stuff. And sometimes kids don't exactly do what their father or their mother does. My father was an aerospace engineer, and I didn't end up doing that. But what I do believe is that God gives you a lot of different types of signs that points you towards the right direction. Like for myself, for instance, I discovered at a very young age that I have a talent and knack for music, and my family has always been supportive of that, because they would always look at me and say, well, you know what, Alex, you can go to school, you can choose whatever you want to do, but you got to go to school. And so I think that's a pretty good medium. And if you just give your faith and trust to God, and you're willing to be able to find some sort of balance through everything, then I think you do okay, because sometimes parents don't always know best, But all the answers that you have are the answers that are within you. But the answers that are within you are the answers that God has interjected into you. That's how I feel about it.
My family very much wanted to gear me towards making as much money as possible, which was they wanted to have my mentality be, focus on the money rather than enjoying what you do. And I think their reasoning for that was mostly because of how our living situation was when I was first growing up. We were always moving place to place. A couple times we were homeless, so their worries are warranted for why they want me to just always focus on money. But in the end, when it came time to go to college and like figure out what I want to do, it was just so draining of your soul whenever you're just focusing on, okay, this is probably going to make the most money, let's go do that. And I hated it so much. I took like business classes to start, and I hated it. So I ended up doing music, and they didn't like that very much, but they said, you know what, as long as you're making money. So, and I guess I am. So, but it was more so just, to focus more on what fulfills me rather than what fills my pockets.
Right.
But yeah.
And speaking from the other side of that coin, the parent aspect, I did have one son, and he had called, and there was some, something that he wanted to try and attempt. And my advice to him was, go for it because you're young. So if you try it and you fail, well, at least you can say, I gave it a try. I just didn't succeed. But if you succeed, then that might be the path that you can go down. And so throughout the years, I would encourage him. Oh, this job, this and this, that. And so I'm not going to be, sitting in the office 9 to 5, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
So at some point, you just have to realize you do have to follow your passions. But as a parent, you want your children to be what is the word? Self-sufficient. You want them to be able to, pay their rent, eat on a daily basis,
Absolutely.
and put gas in their car, whatever. I mean, so there's kind of, and we should always seek God first, because what is our plan? Because God gives all of us different talents. One may be numbers. So someone may just wake up every morning excited to go to Target and be an accountant. I mean, because that's their passion. And so there are people who are for that.
Yeah.
But then if your talent is something else, that's a God-given ability that you can, work to, to increase that talent or to better yourself.
Yeah.
But I think whatever we do, for God's sake, that we're going to be successful in that.
And I think to your point, we know David had more children than just Solomon, but Solomon was the one whom was tasked with building this, because of course we knew that God had chosen him to lead the nation. But I think that is a difficult conversation because everyone's personality is different, and I think parents can just say, okay, this is the one. But I think you should be in tune to praying and looking at your child's likes and dislikes, and don't try to force them to do something that just does not fit their personality. Some people are very creative. You have some people that are very down to the numbers, and it's interesting to see. I know when I was growing up, my parents were very supportive, like, okay, whatever you want to do. But now that I have matured, I can see where, now that I'm in my 40s, where I'm kind of a blend of both my mother and my father. And I think it's interesting how that happens. But I do think, parents need to pay attention and they should pray.
Yeah. I was going to say too that, in the case of my father, for instance, my father was pushed into engineering. and he did really well. But his real passion was languages, and he knew 6 different types of languages. He knew Spanish, he knew French, German, all that type of stuff. And my dad has always told me that you should just do whatever you feel passionate about. Yes, I make the money, but I don't necessarily feel fulfilled. And in the case of Jim Carrey's father decided to play it safe, and I believe that he was a banker. And after working with the bank for so many years, he still got laid off. So sometimes when you play it safe, that's not necessarily the most secure thing either. You can still fail at playing it safe. So you just might as well do whatever your heart desires, as long as it's productive and safe, and as long as God leads the way.
Right. Amen. And that's the most important part. God has to lead the way. And your comment about Solomon, yes, he did have several other sons. And we know David wasn't the best father. We see the upheaval that happened within his home. But you're right to say that God was the one who ordained Solomon to be the next leader. And so he was the correct choice, going forward. And so verse 9, it says, behold, a son will be born to you, and David is relating the prophecy that was given to him to Solomon. And it says, who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies on every side. For his name shall be Solomon, and I will give peace and quiet to Israel in his days. And Solomon was the son of Bathsheba. And remember, David, they had the one child who died. And so this was the second child that they had together. And so God took that son from him. He was born ill, and he didn't live very long. And that was due to David's action in regarding Bathsheba. But God, in some ways, redeemed him and allowed him to have another child by Solomon, who would be the future king. So even though his other sons, tried to make a play for the kingdom and did all of these things, but they were removed from the picture. So God's plan will always prevail.
And there's a note in my Bible that Solomon means peaceful. So that's what that name means.
In verse 10, he shall build a house for my name, and he shall be my son, and I will be his father, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. So here God is making a promise to Solomon. He had made that same promise to David, that someone in his line would be on the kingdom forever. And so now he's reiterating that promise to Solomon. So he's saying, I will be your father. And so in that, then you will have the kingdom. Verse 11, it says, now my son, the Lord be with you, that you may be successful and build the house of the Lord your God, just as he has spoken concerning you. So David just laid out the prophecy to Solomon. He said, you were called for this. God chose you, called you by name before you were even born. And so your God's plan for your life was already established. And God's plan for our life has already been established before we're even hit this earth. He knows who we are, what our name is going to be, and what contribution that we are going to make. So sometimes it's not just our heart's desire, because God puts that desire in you, right? It's not, we just don't come up with it ourselves and say, I desire to do, this, that, or the other.
Yeah.
God gives you those desires along with the talents and the skills to complete them.
Exactly. That's why he said that. All the answers that you have are within you, but those are the answers that God has provided you.
Yeah.
That's the beacon.
That's right. So verse 12, only the Lord give you discretion and understanding and give you charge over Israel so that you may keep the law of the Lord your God. So he's telling him that, God's going to give him the will and the way on how to do, to be the ruler over Israel. But, you have to put God first, keep his laws. He's already laid out, what is required of you. So as long as you follow his laws and his statutes, then you won't have any problem. God will continue to give you peace, but as we go forward, Solomon doesn't actually hold out to that. He starts out good, but he doesn't end so well. And it's just like with a lot of people, God has favor on their lives. And as long as we are, keeping our walk close to him, God will, flourish, help us to flourish. We will be successful. And so Solomon was not only successful in wisdom and knowledge, but God also blessed him materially so. And so he gave him double for what he asked for. And God will do the same for us. But our problem is we want all of the blessings that God can give, but we want to do it our way. We don't want to follow what he says to do.
Then I also think to that point, some people don't realize that to get to success, you're going to have to go through something. Like there's going to be some L's you're going to have to take, because that's how you're going to learn to approach each challenge differently based on some failures early on in life.
And failure is good. Not being successful all the time is good, because then we can learn from that. If everything that you put your hand to turned out perfect every single time, then what would you do? You would want to take the glory for it, say, oh, look at me, look what I can do. I'm this and I'm that and I. But sometimes when things don't go right and we have to put a little extra effort into it, or we have to maybe rethink some situations, that in a sense draws us to God, because we can say, okay, this was my idea. I wanted to do this thing, but it didn't quite work out. So God, what do you say about it? And I think that keeps us humble in a sense, because we know it's not always in our own strength that we do things, that we need the help of God.
That's right. I agree with that. I mean, even bodybuilder, actor, everybody knows Arnold Schwarzenegger once said that you can call me whatever you want, but don't call me a self-made man. Because the reason why I was able to get to where I'm at was because of the support network that I've had around me. I've had this producer, I've had that bodybuilder, I've had this travel agent, whatever, that brought me into these different types of opportunities. And, a lot of people don't realize that even though society talks about self-made people all the time, or, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, all that stuff, we are literally at the mercy of everyone around us. It's other people that could present us the opportunities, but it is up to us to take those opportunities. But people forget, how much of an impact other people have around you and how much of an impact you have around other people.
Right, and that's very true, because what is the saying that no man is an island? We're not out here by ourselves on our own. We need other people. In verse 13 says, then you will prosper if you are careful to observe the statutes and ordinance which the Lord commanded of Moses concerning Israel. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear nor be dismayed. So he's telling him, just do what Moses laid out according to what God said. And he's, be strong, be courageous. Do not fear, because God is with you. And that's the same thing that he told Joshua. He told him, told him over and over, do not fear. And, you are courageous. You are courageous in God. So he's trying to, encourage him, give him peace about, his future destiny. But the main important thing is, follow the commandments of the Lord. If you do that, then you don't have to worry about anything else, because God is always going to have your back. So verse 14, it says, now behold, with great pains, I have prepared for the house of the Lord. So this is what David has set aside for him: 100,000 talents of gold, and 100,000, and a million talents of silver and bronze and iron beyond weight, for they are in great quantity. Also timber and stone I have prepared, and you may add to them. So he says all of this is already set aside. It's just waiting for you to start. But if this isn't enough, then you can add to it. So he's, giving him all the supplies and the resources, and not just the material things. Verse 15 says, moreover, there are many workmen with you, stone cutters, masons of stone, and carpenters, and all men who are skillful in every kind of work. So you have the materials, you have your workforce, you just need to do it. It's all there laid out for you. And of the gold, the silver, and the bronze, and the iron, there is no limit. Arise and work, and may the Lord be with you. So he's giving him the command, and he says, go forth. It's all there for you. You just have to put it together. In verse 17, David also commanded all the leaders of Israel to help his son Solomon. So not only did he pass on the vision to Solomon, he also gave that vision to all of his leaders. So Solomon knows, okay, yes, I will be the king. I am the leader. The buck falls on me. But then I have this whole support system. My dad's not going to be here. He's not going to be around much longer. But just as you were saying, he did not do it on his own. He had people who were supportive of him. And, when he didn't know what to do, he had people that he could go to and ask for advice and counsel. Let's see. And his son Solomon saying, is not the Lord your God with you? And has he not given you rest on every side? For he has given the inhabitants of the land into my hand, and the land is subdued before the Lord and before his people. So David's kingdom was a lot of wars, warring within his own household, wars with neighboring nations, the Philistines, the Amorites, this group, that group. And so they were always constant war. Even before his kingdom, he was in war with Saul. So now in his old age, and his son is ready to take the throne, all the wars are over. All the fighting is done. Israel is established. They have their land. They are a progressing people. And so now Solomon is going to reap the benefits of everything that his father had done. And so 19, it says, now set your heart and your soul to seek the Lord your God. Arise therefore and build the sanctuary of the Lord God, so that you may bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord and the holy vessels of God into the house that is built for the name of the Lord. So now the Ark of the Covenant, it was built during their Exodus, and God gave specific commandments and instructions on how it was supposed to be transported, how they're supposed to take care of it, who was supposed to handle it. No one was supposed to touch it. It was just supposed to be for the priest. And in previous chapters, we saw when they tried to bring the ark into Israel and they didn't do it the correct way, and people ended up dying behind it. So now The ark is in safekeeping, and so this temple that they're building is going to house not only the ark, but all of the sacred items that that Israel has that pertain to God. And you got to let me know what my time is.
We're a little over.
Okay, so wow, that went fast. So we will stop right there, and then we will pick up in First Chronicles chapter 23 on the first verse. So I thank you all for your input and discussion, and we'll end it right there.